Hi gang, Robute Guilliman has issued his orders. Titus, newly invested captain of the Ultramarine Second Company, has been ordered to retake the 500 worlds in the name of the Imperium. But what are the 500 worlds and why are they so important? Hey look, I've got merch now. Have a look below or stay tuned at the end to find out more. So, the latest advancement of the Warhammer 40,000 storyline is upon us. Captain Titus, the star of the Space Marine video game series, has been invested as the new captain of the Ultramarine Second Company, a role he has held before, and he's been charged by his master, the returned Primarch, Robute Guilliman, with the re-establishment of the 500 worlds of Ultramar, a task many, including him, consider impossible, mostly because a load of them have been destroyed. In fact, one of the things Titus says in this little clip is how he considers this order to prove how disconnected and out of time Guilliman is.
He is a demigod out of time, fighting for a golden age that can never dawn again.
This feels like an order from a different age when the galaxy was a very different place. But what are the 500 worlds? In this video, I'm going to go through what they were, how the Ultramarines came to control them, and why they don't have them anymore. In the galaxy of Warhammer 40,000, it's pretty normal for chapters of Space Marines to claim dominion over whole worlds and systems in the Imperium. Most chapters occupy a chapter planet, which was ceded to their chapter as their domain, either on the founding of the chapter or as a reward for some great service in the past, and they're duty-bound to protect it and the surrounding area. Those worlds supply the chapter forges with raw materials and give the chapter a recruitment base from the local population, and as part of that deal, the planets are spared from the Imperial tithe. They're the sovereign domain of that chapter, and that domain often includes the entire system too. These planets are often feral or feudal worlds, as those are seen as ideal for Space Marine recruitment, but there's considerable divergence. Some chapters preside over advanced hive worlds, with maybe an island or a continent dedicated to their use. Some watch over their worlds from moons or orbital fortresses. Some even have multiple worlds or a cluster of many sparsely populated systems from which they can draw their recruits. But standing above this is the pinnacle of Space Marine dominion in the 41st millennium. Ultramar, an entire region of the galaxy that is the sovereign domain of just one Space Marine chapter. And the reasons for that are due to a few things: its distance from Terra, its Primarch's specific set of skills, and the vagaries of the Great Crusade. Ultramar lies to the galactic southeast at the furthest extent of the Ultima segmentum, about as far from Holy Terra as it's possible to be and still remain in the Imperium. As we know, 10,000 years before the present setting of 40k, the Emperor arose on Earth and instigated his Great Crusade, a plan to unite the disparate strands of humanity across the galaxy, led by the 20 Space Marine legions and their Primarchs. But in a disastrous sequence of events, the infant Primarchs were scattered into the warp before the Crusade could really get going, and they came to land on various planets across the galaxy, which meant that the Crusade, at least initially, was not only a war of unification, but a desperate search to locate all these lost Primarchs and place them back in command of their legions. The capsule containing the 13th Primarch was one of the more widely scattered, and it came to rest upon the world of Macragge on the far eastern fringe. Macragge had weathered the Age of Strife pretty well as far as human planets go. It was a rocky planet with a temperate climate that had retained some level of technology from humanity's past. It was a civilized world, ruled by a semi-democratic senate, which was presided over by two co-consuls. And it was one of those consuls, Connor Guilliman, that adopted the infant Primarch and raised him as a son. Robute Guilliman would grow quickly to become the first sole consul of Macragge, taking over after his father was murdered at the hands of the other consul, and he turned his supernatural abilities as an organizer and a logistician to governing an empire. Macragge had been lucky enough to remain in contact with some nearby systems, allowing some level of communication to continue through the darkness of the Age of Strife, but it was very localized. It didn't mean that getting there from anywhere else in the galaxy was particularly easy. The region was extremely far away from Terra, so much so that maps from Terra frequently just referred to the area with the Ultima symbol or the word Ultra, which designated that this was just as far as mankind could go. And while the Emperor had a suspicion that there was a Primarch out there, warp storms prevented him from getting close for years. Guilliman would be the 7th found of the Emperor's sons. He was found in 837 M31, but it took the Emperor a few years to get through, and in that time, as the sole ruler of Macragge, he'd already revolutionized the planet. In a few short years, he'd rebuilt Macragge into a model of prosperity, and by studying ancient star maps, he'd re-established contact and some trade with nearby systems, even fighting minor wars on some of them. And unaware of anything happening in the rest of the galaxy, it was this small area Guilliman saw as the beginning of his new project, Ultramar. It was common for Primarchs to have united their planet by the time they were found, but when the Emperor's fleet finally pierced the storms and arrived at Macragge, he found the beginnings of a small empire and a Primarch who shared in his dream of unity, and Guilliman quickly pledged himself to the Emperor's cause. The 13th Legion of Astartes, the ones drawn from Guilliman's gene line, were moved. Their operating base was relocated to Macragge, and they were renamed the Ultramarines in honour of those old maps. The Emperor gave his new son independent oversight of the entire region, essentially ratifying Guilliman's existing plans, and with the new ships, technology and Astartes' muscle of the Imperium, Roboute Guilliman's dreams of empire expanded again. Over the following decades, the Ultramarines' legion would expand quickly, conquering outwards from Macragge and its contacted worlds, hundreds of star systems in the Ultima Segmentum and along the Eastern Fringe being brought into compliance through either diplomacy or warfare. But even when warfare was, regrettably, the method taken, the worlds that were conquered by the 13th Legion were not left as blasted wastelands, as was common with some other legions. Guilliman's genius for logistics and governance saw them rebuilt by the Ultramarines and their armies of auxiliaries into productive, well-ordered societies. This shouldn't be surprising. Even before their reunification, the 13th Legion were notably opposed to waste and attrition, and they were well known for working alongside human forces, and Guilliman himself was an idealist. He foresaw a day when the Great Crusade to unify the galaxy would be over, and he encouraged his warriors to cultivate their skills in governance, diplomacy and administration so that they could still be useful in this promised future. At the height of that period of the Great Crusade, the Ultramarines' honours eclipsed all other legions, bringing more worlds into compliance than any other, and those worlds were all folded into the wider Legion supply chain and recruitment pool, which allowed the Legion to grow too. By the latter days of the Great Crusade, Ultramar, the region conquered and administered by the 13th Legion and their servants, was known as the 500 Worlds, a shining jewel in the faraway east of the Imperium, a model for the rest of the galaxy. It was administratively split into 4 fiefdoms, regions that were ruled over by a major world and overseen by a high-ranking Legion officer given the title of Tetrarch. At the end of the Crusade, these were Ecos Lamiad, the Tetrarch of Connor, Tauro Nicodemus, the Tetrarch of Saramanth, Valentus Dolor, the Tetrarch of Occluda, and Stolos Amintas, the Tetrarch of Ajax. And there were even rumours of a potential 5th fiefdom, which would require its own Tetrarch, as Calth, the area's major shipyard, was growing in influence. With a recruitment pool of that size, the 13th Legion had grown to eclipse all others. But by the end of the Great Crusade, the Ultramarines were by a long way the largest legion, over double the size of some other legions. But it was that size and power that made them a target for Horus. While planning his heresy, Horus assigned Guilliman and the Ultramarines to return and muster in their home systems in preparation for a largely fake campaign that would definitely happen, spreading out into the darkness. And then his allies in the Word Bearers, through dark sorcery, raised a massive warp storm, the Ruin Storm, that barred them from any contact with the rest of the galaxy as the Horus Heresy played out. Calth, in the Viridian system, was destroyed, its dockyards burned, and its star poisoned by the Word-bearers, with a large proportion of the Legion killed in the fires of betrayal, and the Ultramarines were confined to Ultramar for the rest of the war. Things were so obscured that, for a time, Guilliman, believing Terra might have fallen, declared his worlds to be an interim successor state. Ultramar would be Imperium Secundus. That didn't last for long, though. When news arrived that Terra did in fact still hold out against Horus, the Ultramarines and the Blood Angels and Dark Angels, two other legions that had been isolated behind the Ruin Storm, finally managed to find their own ways through, and Imperium Secundus was dissolved. But by this point, the writing was already on the wall for the 500 worlds. In the aftermath of the Horus Heresy, the Imperium was a ruin, and while the Loyalists were victorious, many of their legions were decimated, shadows of their former selves. And while many of the survivors hounded the traitors back into the Eye of Terror, it was Guilliman and the Ultramarines who held much of the Imperium together. Their isolation had allowed them to replace most of their losses since Calth, and so in the post-Heresy period, the Ultramarines were everywhere, bringing traitor worlds back into compliance, harrying Horus's followers, and defending against opportunistic Xenos raids. Guilliman would become Lord Commander of the Imperium and Imperial Regent, and he implemented a series of reforms designed to prevent another Horus Heresy from happening again. The Imperial military was restructured to distribute power, so no one traitorous commander could ever amass as much power as Horus once did, and part of that was the dissolution of the Astartes legions into independent chapters of about 1,000 Marines in an event known as the Second Founding. Each chapter would be an independent force with their own heraldry and traditions, honour-bound to defend the Imperium in whatever way they saw fit, and often given custodianship over usually a single system to provide for them, their chapter fief. But these reforms had to be seen to be imposed on the Ultramarines too. The idea of a single chapter ruling 500 worlds of the Imperium would have been political suicide, and so the vast realm of Ultramar was dismantled. The domains of the Ultramarines Legion were reduced to 8 local systems, all of which remained the chapter fief of the new Ultramarines chapter. All 8 shared much of Macragge's ancient culture and were considered recruitment worlds for the Ultramarines. In keeping with the standards for these new chapters, none of the worlds were subject to the Imperial tithe, their output considered to be funding the Ultramarines chapter, but so productive were they, and so populous, that the worlds of this new chapter fief continued to supply regiments to the Imperial Guard. Several hundred regiments of the Ultramar Defence Auxilia were available to fight alongside their Astartes masters or be committed to the Imperium's wider wars across the galaxy. The capital planet of the reduced chapter's domains remained Macragge, the chapter housed in the Fortress of Hera, built to accommodate 10 times that number of Astartes. Macragge was a world of rocky uplands that dominated the available landmass, and the remaining quarter of the land was carefully divided between agriland, manufactorums, and colonnaded population centres. The planet bristled with defensive weapons, not just from the Fortress of Hera, but dotted around the peaks of the world. Though it had been invaded multiple times, no invader has ever managed to land without a severe mauling. The other remaining worlds were very different. Talassar was a world of storm-tossed seas with only one major continent, Glaudor, the site of a massive battle against invading orcs shortly after the heresy. The triple planets of Quintan, Tarantus, and Masali were desert worlds locked in a shared orbit in the Masali system, each one of them studded with advanced hydroponic farms and wind traps that fed underground reservoirs. Despite being desert worlds, they're so productive that they're still classed as agri-worlds, and those were surpassed by Prandium and Iax, both extremely verdant planets covered in flora and fauna and with significant natural resources. Iax was known as the Garden of Ultramar for its well-ordered farms and managed woodlands. The least populated of the new Ultramar was Ispandor, a forest world settled in the early Age of Strife and which marked the furthest edges of the new Ultramar's domains. And even Calth in the Viridian system was repurposed and became a thriving world again, its citizens relocated to vast arcologies under the surface, away from the glare of its poisoned sun. The cavern cities of Calth were built on such a huge scale, they were as light and airy as anywhere else in the Empire, and the planet retained its previous role as a vast shipyard, its orbital docks constructing and repairing the Ultramarines' fleet. Other worlds that were retained in these 8 systems had more specialist functions. The Forge world of Connor also remained part of the Empire. Its moon of Gantz totally seceded to Adeptus Mechanicus control, and Parmenio was retained as a training world for the chapter's recruits. The rest of the 500 worlds were released from the Ultramarines' direct control as part of those reforms, becoming just normal Imperial worlds. To say they were completely cut off would be incorrect. Many of the Ultramarines' successor chapters would set up home in that region, such as the Scythes of the Emperor on Sotha or the Nova Marines on Honorium, which once marked the northern edge of old Ultramar. But most of the planets were now independent and required to submit their tithes just like any other world of the Imperium. Guilliman would eventually fall in battle against his brother Fulgrim during the Battle of Thessalia in 121 M31, critically injured and placed in stasis just before the point of death, but for the next 10,000 years, the span of the current Imperium, Ultramar has endured. The 8 quasi-autonomous systems, carefully governed by the Ultramarines chapter, remained a jewel in the Imperium. Its worlds were wealthy, progressive, disciplined and productive, with trade flowing between them. They shared many similarities of architecture and culture, and they were largely free from civil unrest and rebellion. They weren't paradises by any means. The worlds were still largely industrialized and ruled by a basically feudal system, ultimately governed from Macragge, but the citizens of Ultramar were notably healthier and generally less oppressed than citizens within the rest of the Imperium. Changes did occur over time, with the formation of first the Inquisition and then the Death Watch. The world of Thalassa Prime was redesignated an inquisitorial fortress, and there were losses too during the first invasion of the Tyranids, when Hive Fleet Behemoth assaulted Macragge. Prandium was completely destroyed, scoured bare by the advancing Hive fleets. But largely, the Ultramar instituted in the aftermath of the heresy has stayed the same since then. However, that looks set to change. At the end of the 41st millennium, around the same time as the fall of Cadia and the spread of the Great Rift, Roboute Guilliman returned, the first Primarch openly active in the Imperium in millennia, and resumed his positions as Lord Commander and Imperial Regent. His initial years were spent shoring up the reduced Imperium Sanctus against a wave of Chaos attacks, and then organising and leading the Indomitus Crusade, and that culminated in the Plague Wars, as Mortarion and his Death Guard invaded Ultramar. Their main attacks fell on Espandor and Ajax. In fact, Ajax, previously a verdant agri-world, was left a wasteland after the deployment of virus bombs in the final stages of the campaign, but eventually, with the arrival of a massive reinforcement force led by Guilliman, the Death Guard were driven back, and in the wake of the Plague Wars, Guilliman instituted some changes to the organisation of the chapter and of Ultramar, casting aside some of those decisions he made 10,000 years ago in the wake of the heresy. One of the earliest of these was to re-establish the 500 worlds. He declared the 500 worlds to once again be part of the dominion of Ultramar, re-established the old Tetrarchy, and even expanded the organisation of the Ultramarines and many of their descendants to allow this. Most chapters had a boost in numbers by an expansion of the 10th Company, and the Ultramarines even added an 11th and 12th Company. This new realm of Ultramar is defended not by a legion, but by 10 chapters that all descend from the Ultramarines lineage, known as the Shield Chapters of Ultramar, each stationed on one of its major worlds. These comprise, first, the Ultramarines themselves, the ancient chapters of the Scythes of the Emperor, Doom Eagles, Nova Marines, Silver Skulls, Avenging Sons and Sons of Aura, and the newly created Praetors of Ultramar, Aquiloan Brotherhood, and the Reborn. The new Prospective Realm is divided again into 5 sectors. The central sector falls under the rule of Macragge, and therefore under the rule of the current Ultramarines chapter master, Marneus Calgar, and then the 4 other sectors each fall under the command of one of the Tetrarchs, who are charged with expanding the borders of Ultramar in the 4 different directions. The Northern Reaches, administered from the Forge World of Connor, is ruled by Severus Agemon, the Ultramarines' first captain. The Eastern expansion, centered on Vespator, is overseen by Decimus Felix, the Ultramarines' 11th captain. The Southern sector is commanded by Porton, the second captain of the Genesis chapter. He commands from Andamung. And the Western expansion is based on the world of Protoss and overseen by Captain Balthus of the Doom Eagles. Of course, merely appointing those roles and saying things are back the way they were does not necessarily make it so. Many of the old 500 worlds have since fallen to chaos, or been scoured clean of life by alien invasion, or lost to some other calamity, and all 4 Tetrarchs and all 10 Shield chapters have been actively involved in returning these lost worlds to compliance and bringing them back under the umbrella of Ultramar since the end of the Plague Wars. The appointment of Captain Titus and the Second Company to this task is the new development here. But it's not a totally surprising one. The traditional role of the Second Company Captain in a Codex chapter is Master of the Watch, which usually means responsibility for the security of the chapter's homeworld or system. And if the Ultramarines' home domains are once again the entire 500 worlds of old Ultramar, then yeah, the safety of them would come under Titus's new job description. But even with the help of 4 Tetrarchs and 9 other chapters, reconstituting all of the 500 worlds is going to be a colossal task. As Titus says, many have been totally lost. Is he expected to, recolonize them or just find replacements? Anyway, that's the history of the 500 worlds and of Ultramar as an idea, its differing scales over time. Once a jewel in the crown of the Imperium and apparently destined to be so again. I'm sure we'll find out how that goes as the events of the new campaign unfold. As soon as some books are out, I'll be back to tell you all about it. Until then, thanks for watching. And if you'd like to hear more about the various campaigns of 40k, there's probably a box popping up to your right. And if you'd like to support the channel, buy some merch. It's almost Christmas as I publish this, so it's a good time. Or you can like and subscribe, or of course you can join the Patreon or the YouTube membership scheme for early videos and a name in this thing scrolling past right now. See ya.